Hello, everybody. Let's wait a few minutes until we have everybody who wanted to join. Welcome, Terry.
Well, hey, thanks, Andy. It's good to see you again.
Yes. And let me just brief intro here. Let me just do a brief intro here. Um, well, as some of you know, uh, Terry and I share a passion together, and we are quite passionate about flows, automating business processes using flows. And we're both uh, lightning champions, I believe, and then we were platform
Well, alums,
champions.
we're alums now, Andy.
We are alumni.
Yes, alumni. Yes.
Yeah, and we have done a joint session together before that we have broadcasted on both our YouTube channels. Terry has a YouTube channel that has more than 2,000 subscribers, 2,000 something, 2,500, something like that.
So,
And he's been doing a lot of community events, and he's putting out valuable content about teaching flows to newcomers and advanced users. And I do some stuff also on my YouTube channel called Salesforce Break. So, and we come together once in a while and we chat about what should we do together next. And we have come together lately and we talked about doing another session, this time to talk about the fact that workflow rules and process builders are going to be retired apparently. And because of that, we want to address this change, and we want to also give our opinion on how to proceed with that, because right now everybody has a different opinion. Some people have concerns, questions about the topic. So just before we get started, we are live right now on LinkedIn, on both of our YouTube channels. So wherever you're watching, if you write your questions and comments on the channel that you are on, we are going to be able to see them. We may not be able to answer all of them on chat because the integration of StreamYard varies depending on the platform, but we are going to try to get to all of them and answer them at least, by talking about the issue, the topic. So Terry, welcome.
thank you, Andy. Great to be here and good to see you again.
Okay, so we have discussed on how we are going to address this topic, and obviously the most important part of the topic is the fact that Salesforce announced that workflow rules and process builders are going to be retired, and they've done that during Winter 22 release readiness broadcasts. Did that surprise you, Terry?
Yes and no. No, from the standpoint of, man, we've got 3 different ways of doing this stuff now, and so it seemed a little bit like overkill. I kind of thought workflow rules kind of deserved to go away a long time ago, but until there was parity between the different methods, it was a little bit hard to say one should go away and versus the one that should stay. But I personally, have. And I think I said this last time we got together, Andy, I haven't written a workflow rule. I don't even know how long ago it's been. It has been forever. And even process builder over the last probably year, I bet I've only written one process builder in the last year. So mostly everything I do is certainly going to flow.
Yeah. I mean, you have been doing Salesforce automation for a very long time, probably like, I don't know, when did you build your first workflow rule? It's been 7, 8 years, maybe?
Yeah, I've been doing Salesforce for, I want to say 14 years. I'm starting to lose track. It's been too long. But yeah, workflow would have been something I would have done right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it was interesting because I started my Salesforce focus and journey in 2018, really. I mean, I've been doing Salesforce as a user more than 10 years, but I started doing all these certifications
Sure.
starting in 2018. And I really didn't build too many workflow rules and process builders. And the funny thing for me was Now that we've started talking about all these issues, I started going back and building workflow rules and process builders just to see how they work and how I can compare them one to one. And let
Right.
me tell you, I hate process builders. That's very clear. I think the interface and the usability is not very good. I don't like it. I like workflow rules actually for what they do, because they have a simple interface. They provide kind of like a form that you fill out. You can easily reference like a future date, for example,
Yeah.
saying 7 days from now. You don't really have to build a formula. They are actually good for what they do, right?
Yeah, they are, and they're darn fast. If you've looked at some of the architecture blogs posts that's out there now, they've done some time studies on all three of these, and workflow rules are crazy fast. They're not as fast as what our record trigger flows are, but when you compare it to process builder, it's hugely faster. I want to say almost 10 times faster, but that's probably an exaggeration.
Yeah.
But they are very fast in comparison to process builder.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just so that we clarify one thing, though, I mean, some of our viewers might not know that. First of all, the functionality on the flow side is very big, very broad, right? When you compare to workflow rules and process builders. In fact, the functionality, uh, one type of flow on the Salesforce flow builder functionality is record triggered flow, and record triggered flow is pretty much the corresponding functionality to workflow rules and process builders, and they can actually do more than what they can do, and they can trigger in two different ways. One is before save, the other one after save. And the before save part is not available on workflow rule side or process builder side, right? They all run after save.
Right.
Workflow rules are fast and rapid, but they do limited operations after save. But some of that stuff right now, I think all of that stuff can be done uh, on the flow side, and mostly most of the field update part before save.
Right. And for those that are trying to learn flow, I always teach that your best entry point into flow is record trigger flows, because it's already the types of things you're used to doing with process builder and the old workflow rules if you're still there. So I think definitely start with learning using the record trigger flows.
Yeah. So let's talk about the main topic here. And
Yeah.
we wanted to talk about the timeline and the next steps for the retirement of workflow rules and process builders. And we just pulled up, there's a really nice blog post by Jen, uh, Jan Lee, and she gave us a timeline, a rough timeline on what we should expect to happen in the coming days about this. And the summary is this. So there's going to be an initial migration tool with support for workflow rules translation to Flow, and that will be released in spring 22. And subject to forward-looking statements. We don't really work for Salesforce, so we don't really have to do that. But
Yeah, we can
it's
commit
it's,
them and
it's a
not get
tradition.
in trouble.
So Jan promised. Jan promised, and she is going to deliver. Just kidding. So, and then the next step is additional support for process builder migration is currently estimated for summer 22, and dependent on the feedback from the initial migration tool. And we plan to begin blocking the ability to create new processes and workflows in winter 23, pending successful migrations and community input. And these dates are subject to changes, obviously.
Yeah, so that first one, that migration tool, that translation piece is actually just a couple months away for us. So that's like February is, I think, when that spring, February, March, somewhere in there is when that spring release will be out. So we should start seeing some of the tools pretty darn fast.
Yeah. And I've had people tell me, and you probably heard the same comments, and that's probably the reason why we're talking about this and saying, don't migrate your current automation to Flow. Um, People say, I'm going to hold off and wait on the migration tool to become available so that I can start working on this. And why is that a good idea or a bad idea? What do you think?
I I'm not a huge fan, so I kind of like you said, Andy. There's I think there's people on both sides of this fence, and I happen to be on the side of the fence that I'm not all that excited about having a translation tool. Maybe in some cases there might be a use for it, but I think it makes sense for people to go through their org and really document what they have in workflow rules and in process builders, and look at ways of kind of cleaning house, um, maybe optimizing the way that they structure those existing processes. There's probably some out there we didn't even know that are still active in our orgs that, that frankly ought to go away. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I don't know for sure what they're going to provide in that migration tool. So one of the things that I've wondered is if they allow us to individually select which ones we want to migrate, and maybe that's okay. I don't know. What's your thoughts on it, Andy?
Yeah, well, the one thing that I've been always telling people is, that's where we, I think, come together is, first of all, we need to understand very well what we have in our orgs currently. And if you've had an org like at least a couple of years, and in many cases people inherit orgs, they come as a new admin to an existing org, they don't really entirely know what's in there. So,
Right.
a basic rule that we have in technology is we don't really touch things as long as they don't break, right? If they work, if they don't really cause trouble, we don't really touch them. But there are a couple of inherent issues with that. One is there could be some things that actually are not needed, and they are in there listed, possibly even being launched, but potentially not doing anything or not doing anything useful, right? That would be one thing to look at. The other thing is obviously what does all the existing automation currently do and how they relate to each other. How can we clean up shop, combine stuff, and make them more efficient? That would be probably another area to look at, I would say.
Yeah, I think those are good points. Very good points.
So the initial assessment of what's available is very important. Don't you agree? How would folks go about doing that?
So as far as learning opportunities, is that what you're asking, Andy? Ways to
Yeah, well, that's not what I was asking you
okay.
exactly, but that brings up a very good point because look, we need to first understand what's available inside our organizations
Yeah.
to convert all this stuff to the new flow functionality. And at the same time, there is another important task that needs to be done, I would say, is to understand all the functionality and what's available to us, because we have a variety of resources and functionality available to us on the flow builder side. We need to also start learning all the capabilities on that side, because now we are going to be able to do things that we were not able to do before, right?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Jennifer Lee has actually commented. Did you see her comment? I think you should maybe post that out there for people to see. I think if she's online, I think we can't have a better expert than that. So let's. I
Yes.
recommend taking time to review existing processes to validate that they're still valid before moving them to flow. When I did this as a customer, I found automation is no longer needed. So yeah, Jen's agreeing exactly with what we were saying there. I think that makes a lot of sense. Jen, thanks for joining. It's exciting to have you
Thank you, Jen.
online.
I
Yeah,
mean, pretty much we all agree. I don't think there is anybody who is passionate about processes and automation
yeah.
who would say something
So,
different.
Andy, what's your thoughts on how you might go about that evaluation? What are some resources that are out there that might help people?
Okay, yeah. Well, before the session, yeah, we started talking about this, and um, one of the uh, one of the first places where you can get some information about your current automations is your automation homepage. We have actually a screen now that shows information about our current automations in our org. It is, I would say, at its infancy, it shows a little bit limited information, but still it's something. It's in there. And then the other thing that you reminded me, Terry, and I ran this one for a client the other day, is the optimizer tool, right? So we can actually run the optimizer tool, and we can get information about the current automations that we have in our org. I think it has a different section for workflows, and it has an entirely different section on process builders. It lists all the automations that we have in our org, and it has also a tip and recommendation on converting those to flows whenever possible.
Yeah, and I think it also gives us an estimated how much time it's going to take. But I've always taken the time as a kind of a grain of salt, because I think that's for those that live in more in an ideal world. I think that to truly evaluate what you have and to organize it in a way that makes sense when you're moving it into flow, you're likely going to combine some of those workflows or process builders into a common flow. And I think that's probably not something that you're going to do quickly. I think that's going to take some time. I was reading an article just it's off of Automation Champions, where I believe I'm horrible with names. Those of you who know me, I butcher names all the time, but I believe it's Rashik Gupta. He wrote an article
Rakesh.
There you go. Getting started with Salesforce flows. It's part 72, and he's talking about flow pattern designs. And one of the things that he said that he recommends right at the beginning is to always plan before we build. And I love that concept. And it's simply taking and putting what it is that we need to do. Put your process in actual flow so that it's documented before you ever start going into flow and start building. And I thought, that's something that we would do when my background is coding. Back before flow, I would always just write triggers because I could. And we would always kind of think through our code and plan that out before we would ever start writing a line of code. And I think that this concept applies with our flow as well, that we should take that time to design what exactly is it that we need this to do. And it just is going to leave, I think, a much more efficient flow if we take the time to do that up front.
Definitely. Let's go through the questions really quick. Is that okay, Terry?
Yeah, let's do.
All right. So I'm going to go through the comments really quick. Jason Watts says, I've been looking forward to this. Thanks for joining, Jason. Carlos Guerra, our friend Carlos, says, good guys. He is the best guy.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, yeah. We should have him on.
Yeah. Justice Kakine says, I love workflow rules. Thank you, Justice. Shiba Tukral says, can you do validation for duplicates through flows? If so, what kind of flow would that be? That's your goal, I think, right?
That's an interesting. Duplicate rules do write to tables, if I am remembering correctly, that architecture. I know there's some reports that you can run that are pulling duplicate data from objects. So there, I can't imagine you wouldn't be able to access those same objects in flow. You're still using your duplicate rules, and matching rules still need to be turned on in order for it to write to those tables.
That's right. If you don't turn them on, you're not going to get potential matches or those populated. But I mean, in general, I would make this comment to truly compare two records and decide whether they are duplicates or not. You would have to probably loop through potentials, and in general, flows are not great for that. You are going to hit some kind of limit. And let's do a call out to unofficial SF. I think somebody already wrote here. We use a lot of the components that are published by wonderful people who take the time, their personal time, to actually code things on the Salesforce platform so that we can use and reuse them in our flows. And there is, I think, a compare two collections component over there that could be useful doing that. But I would say flow is not a natural fit for this job.
I would say that too, and I almost kind of wonder what it is you're trying to do with it that is not happening out of the box. So maybe that would be a place to start as well.
Yeah. And Connie Stock says, grateful for you too. We are grateful for you. Thanks for
Thanks, Connie.
joining.
Yeah, absolutely.
And can you post a link with that information in the migration tool? Now, we have actually a migration tool that's available that's kind of like an early beta type of thing on unofficial SF, but Salesforce has not made theirs available yet. So that the timeline we mentioned, this one is going to be happening probably February, March of 2022. Can we display error messages through flows if a duplicate is found? We've discussed this one. This is not a very good fit for flow use case.
Uh, yeah, but you could. I mean, if from the standpoint of if you're creating a new record and that record ends up creating a duplicate, can you display that error message? If you put a fault element on your flow off of your insert, then yes, if it does create a duplicate, it would end up triggering that, and you'd be able to see the
You
error
can do
message.
flows on screen flows. You can do messages. You can do a get first to see whether you get a match. There are workarounds.
Yeah.
Like to have a hands-on understanding. Yeah, I mean, learning Salesforce flows is a lot of experimentation and research.
I was going to say, Andy's got some great tool. He's got a class on Udemy that does a fantastic job of teaching flow. That'd be one resource there that I would recommend. Yeah, there you go. Andy's awesome. You should, if you're not checking his stuff out, you should absolutely do that. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. You'll get all kinds of fun stuff.
Terry is awesome.
I've got
there are a bunch of other awesome people, by the way. It's not only us.
Yeah, I've got things out on YouTube as well. One specifically about I named it from process builder to record trigger flows. That I think is your easiest way to learn flow if you're trying to get hands-on with it, is to do record trigger flows first. And that's that series that I have out on YouTube is a great resource for you as well to begin to learn flow.
Let's see, what other comments do we have here? Yes. Unofficial SF call out by Carlos. We mentioned unofficial SF. That's great. And Justice says, what about the enterprise orgs that have a great deal of workflow rules? It would seem like the migration tool would help a great deal in this regard. That said, great points made here about evaluating the pre-existing automations you clean and update. I agree, great points.
Yeah, Justice, one of the things that I'd kind of go back and remember what it was like when we moved to Lightning. And one of the things that was really expressed a lot of times from people is take the opportunity to learn what's in your org as you're migrating from Classic over to Lightning. This is no different in my mind. The tools are different, but it's a shift in the technology and what we're doing. And anytime that occurs, I know that I've worked in some of these orgs that are just enormous, and the thought of having to go through and document some of that it's an enormous task. So I would certainly not wait until those features, the old workflow rules and process builder, are no longer available. I would get started and maybe pick an object that is maybe a little bit smaller, that's easier to tackle, and just start working through your org one object at a time. And it's not going to probably be crazy clean doing it that way either, but it's still a place you could start.
Yeah, I would say an inventory of what's available is a great idea, whatever format you prefer. Probably doing possibly like a Google sheet of some sorts would be great. The label of the automation, what object does it run on, what does it do, the purpose, And then if there are linkages to fields and other automation, things like that, I would just list it on there. Any searchable, simple database, to be honest with you. I've just done that with validations on an org that has been building validations. A lot of like deadwood among those, some were not doing really anything. Some were not being hit at all. And, that's quite useful once you try to find what's available and how they relate to each other. That would be your inventory. Some people prefer doing process flows or like, something like a lucid chart of what's existing. I think that's probably an overkill.
I will do that.
You would do that? Yeah,
but I'm overkill, so that's all right.
Yeah, because I think some people also do automation on lucid chart first and then do it on the canvas, which that's a lot of work. But if you can do that, it will give you the right framework of designing things. Yes.
Yeah, and when you get into some of the more complex flows, it's easier in my mind to design that out in like a lucid chart, because it's easier to identify before you start building all of your variables and resources. I mean, that takes a lot of time to try to get that framed out. If you were jumping straight into flow, you can do that a lot easier with a simple flow diagram.
Yeah, and I'm going on with the comments. Jen says, hi, guys. And Jen says, this time on LinkedIn, Jen is coming from all directions. We appreciate you, Jen. Thanks for coming.
Can I just interject here real quick?
Yes.
Jen is going to be at the Des Moines. I lead the Des Moines, Iowa user group. She's going to be at our user group, and I believe it's January 20th. And I'm super, super excited, and everybody in the user group is already signing up and getting registered to come. So if you want to jump into the Des Moines user group meeting and have a chance to ask Jen questions or to hear her speak, you're certainly welcome to do that. Find us out there on the Salesforce events page. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to throw that in.
Oh, that of course. And Jason Watts says admins are basically expected to be business analysts. Why can't we just document our workflows and processes in business process mapping? Then, with it in front of us, use the documentation to build the flows. Great comment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And Jen says, document the business process first and get consensus with your business stakeholders before hands-on keyboard in Salesforce.
I'm hearing a lot of themes here that everybody's suggesting document before you jump in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you know that we had a consensus there?
It certainly sounds like it.
Yes. I'm looking. So, Techno, I don't know how to pronounce the last name. We lack a best practice white paper for migrating existing automation to Flow. It would be great to have one. Yes, we don't really have one. I haven't seen one. I have done videos on implementing the most common use cases that we see on workflow rules and process builders on the Flow side. I have done those. And possibly part of the reason for that being some of the stuff that we have on flows that correspond one-to-one to workflow rules probably will be improved as we are coming to the new releases in 2022, because some of them are a little bit cumbersome and maybe not that clear cut, not that simple, not as simple as the workflow rule form mentality in the UI. I would expect some improvements there. That would be probably part of the reason we don't find a lot of documentation on that yet, I would imagine. And then there's a comment, it'll be nice if Trailhead could exist one or more SP to practice flows. One or more SP, meaning? Yeah, I mean, we did hear from the Trailhead team that they are actually building new content that's geared to flows, to teaching flows. And I know Jen is also personally working on that. So we should expect a lot of new stuff, new channels, new style content coming, live sessions coming in 2022, which is very exciting, by the way. The live side of Salesforce Trailhead is very useful. If you haven't tried it, you should definitely try it out.
Oh, super badges. That's what SB is. Okay, I see.
Super badges.
Super badge, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what you'll find out there, Daniel, is there's a lot of resources other than Trailhead, and not knocking Trailhead at all, but Trailhead is kind of a recipe, and if you can follow a recipe, you're great with Trailhead. Again, it's a great product, but what I would like to see is for people, or for people to teach how and why, the why behind following the recipe. And sometimes I feel like Trailhead is just a little bit short of hitting that mark. But to your point, there are a lot of different resources out there. There's a lot of people like Andy, like myself, who are trying to help people get there with flow. And I think if maybe Andy, maybe we can add some potential links afterwards onto our YouTube channels with some options there for someone like Daniel who's looking for different resources, because there's a lot of them out there. A lot of people trying to help get people ready to go.
We are actually able to paste links here on the chat right now, or we can do it after the fact. So if the users come back, we can actually reply to those comments as well after the fact. So we'll post them there. And I have a comment here from Matt Bender. The opportunity to learn about legacy automation can be painful, but you'll get more respect from the users and executives by understanding their inner workings. Take that knowledge and make it better.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have anything to add. That's awesome. Okay, yeah. Well, there is this LinkedIn user. I can't say the user, but it's a good topic to talk about. Any recommendations, templates on how to document flows? I've been using Visio, but time consuming. Well, this is one of the areas that obviously not everybody is going to agree. Some people use a Google Sheet type of stuff. Some people actually have like one like letter size paper or like one page on their Word document that has sections. It'll say, okay, label of the automation, the purpose of the automation, the object that is running on, details and things like that. They have one pager for each automation. There are some folks who want to map things out. I mean, they recreated on Visio, like Lucid Chart. For me, that's a little bit of an overkill, but if that helps you in your process, it could be worth the time. Now, it's very important here to understand that we all learn differently, right? Some of us learn by writing, some of us learn by drawing, more visual. It all depends on your own preference. What is going to help you to understand what's happening right now, and definitely see very, very clearly what needs to be removed, what's not necessary, and what can be optimized. You should pick that route, I would say.
Yeah, and I would just add on the Visio or Lucid Chart method, you don't have to document every detail of that flow. I think you cover the intent of what that flow is in your diagram, and I think that's sufficient. There's also, I think there's a diminishing return on in some cases where the flow is just so simple and easy to understand that other than having some document that indicates, hey, this flow exists and what it does, putting that into a Visio is probably overkill.
Yes. So let's go back to our topics. Well, we wanted to talk about why would you want to actually document everything first? What are the real reasons behind that? First of all, the assessment of current automation is necessary, and in many cases, we don't really know what we have and what they exactly do. I mean, I've talked to very few people who said, like, I know every automation that runs on this org and I know what they do. That's usually not the case. There could be situations where you inherited an older org. There could be situations where you have multiple admins on the same org, or some other users having the admin rights. and it is not possible for you to control everything that's been built over the years in that org. So it's very important that you understand what's already in there, take an inventory, see what needs to be done, and obviously also freeze at some point what's being built on workflow rules and process builders, because in the end, whatever you build on that side is going to have to be converted at some point sooner or later.
Yeah, I would just throw in there too, it's unlikely that you're going to be in that org for the rest of your life. You're probably going to transition to some other business, change jobs, something like that. I'm an independent consultant, and I jump into orgs all the time. And if I don't leave some type of a trail of, hey, this is what's going on, it can be incredibly confusing for the person that follows you. So think about what you would want to know if you were to change jobs and have to quickly get up to speed in a new org, and write that same stuff out for your existing org. Benefit the guys that are following you. The other thing too is I have found that I'm very good at forgetting what I did a week ago. So
Yeah.
if I don't document some of it, I'm probably going to forget by the time I need to go back in there the next time around. So maybe that's just me, Andy. I don't know, but I
Oh,
think
that happens to me all the time. And what do you use to document what you have done? What do you write it into?
I just simply take notes in for myself, my personal notes. I just use OneNote.
Yeah.
For my clients, I will either give them copies of that, or I will, in my flows, I take advantage of the descriptions fields to indicate here's what's happening in this particular section. One thing I wish that flow had that it doesn't is just simply a comment element that we could add into a flow that did nothing but allowed us to document what's happening in a given section. Maybe to put a box or something around it and say, okay, in this piece of the flow, it's doing X. That would be fantastic. Just a simple comment like that would be nice.
Yeah, I think I've seen that requested before. Just
Really?
add a comment. We want a comment element or something. Just drop it
Yeah,
in.
that would be nice. Yes.
Yeah, and the other point is obviously over the years there could be some automations that are in there that are no longer needed, and they are possibly not even being triggered at all. Unfortunately, we don't really have an easy way to see which automations are triggering. We're just talking about this beforehand. Salesforce gave us some reports on screen flows. For example, we can get information on how many screen flows ran, when, how long it took to get from one screen to another. It would be great to be able to report that also for the other types of flows. I think you can do that by setting up trace and looking into logs, whatever, but it's not for the faint-hearted. And I would say, I mean, if you find some automation that's in there that you don't think should be in there, and maybe it's unnecessary, I would probably test that out really well, try and understand what it does in the sandbox, maybe try and trigger it. And if you still don't understand why it's there and it shouldn't be there, I would just turn it off and see if somebody's asking for it. That's the one way you can find out whether it's
Turn it off.
necessary.
Let somebody scream. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't hear a sound, that's how I teach driving to my teenage son, for example. I say, like, move very slowly and stop if you hear a sound, right? So if you don't hear a sound, you don't really need to stop.
Oh, goodness. All right. I'm going to leave that alone.
So, and then the migration tool. What is the migration tool going to do? Most probably it's going to take the perfect automation that you have on the workflow side and the process builder, and it's going to convert that hopefully very well and very optimized to the flow side, assuming that it's going to work very well. At some point it will work very well, but maybe not the first iteration. But the problem there, the potential problem there is, again, do we really have the perfect workflow rule? Do we really have the perfect process builder? So for that one case where we have the perfect one, we want to convert one to one, it could work well, right?
Yeah, and business process is changing so fast, and the likelihood of that process still being valuable in its current form probably 50-50. So it probably is a good idea just to ask questions. Is this still something that's valued as an organization?
Yeah.
I'm giving you all kinds of great things that will take 1,000 hours for you to do. Document it, go through and plan it before you build it. And now I'm telling you, go out and ask if it's still usable. So
yeah, and another important part of that is to learn and understand what's available on the flow side, right? If you learn that really well, you are going to find many different ways that you can do possibly the same thing in a more efficient manner.
Yeah.
And we said today, don't migrate your existing automation, rebuild. What does that mean, Terry? What do we want there? Like, I think you mentioned you want to look at the architectural design.
Yeah, again, and I don't have any great insight as to what this migration tool that Salesforce is building is going to do and not do, but my gut tells me I don't know how they would be able to, they being Salesforce, would be able to architect your flow solution in a way that is any different than the way that you've built it in Process Builder or Workflow Rule. And so when I think don't migrate it, it's because I would rather see people architect a new solution that is more effective, more efficient than what I imagine that the migration tool is going to be able to do for you. If the migration tool is able to allow us to pick and choose which ones we want to move, then there may be a use case for some things to run through that migration tool. I'm just kind of a stickler for things like naming conventions. I like things to, maybe it's a control freak side of me. I like to be in control of what's happening and not necessarily rely on a black box to go out and do some of the stuff for me, not without knowing what's going on in the black box.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that we have a lot of great content coming from Salesforce and from all directions. We had Apex Hours put out content about naming conventions. We had Automation Hour do the same. We have free video content, blog posts, design considerations, and templates. So I'm a little bit different when talking about design considerations and naming conventions. I'm kind of like on the more gray or more flexible side the way I work on those. I think what's important is that you find something that you like, that you can work with, you and your team, by the way, so not only you, and stick with it, right? Be consistent over time so that you can find things where they are. And when you get that error message, when you are creating that change set, you look at that name and then you can tell what that is. I think that's what's important. And one other important point related and regarding to that, when learning flows, I truly believe in experimentation and trying things out in sandboxes and DevWorks. You can't really learn flows by reading and looking at slides. You really need to get your hands into the builder, and then you got to try things out for yourself, where you cannot harm anything, by the way, in sandbox or DevWorks.
Yeah. Did you see Andy Jen's comment on the best way to learn flow?
Yes.
Just roll up your sleeve. I liked that.
That's right.
Take a workflow rule. I hadn't thought about it from just a workflow rule standpoint.
Yeah.
I've always kind of looked at it from Process Builder to flow, but workflow would be even easier. Start with something crazy easy.
Yeah, there are a couple of sessions that I have recorded and put out that shows how do you do the fast field update on workflow rule, process builder, and flow. How do you do the task creation on workflow rule, process builder, and flow? And how do you email? Because we use a lot of email alerts from workflow rule, process builder, and flow. You can look at that, but it's important to try. Jen is very accurate in her comment. You also hear a lot of people saying like, well, what is the one resource that's going to teach me everything about flows? There is not one resource. And what is the one trick? What is I'm waiting for the migration tool. I'm waiting for the next release. No, don't wait. There is no reason to wait for anything.
Yeah.
And so we have talked about documenting. We have talked about deactivating what's not necessary, and we have talked about also building new flows. And regarding that, I think we've had a couple of comments here. Let me just see. So I think, well, we have a lot of comments now. I having trouble keeping up. I think Matt had a comment here I'm trying to find about design considerations. Yes, this one we have read already. And here. So Matt said with before save fast field updates, flows to replace basic workflow field updates, do you recommend creating many simple flows or trying to combine some of these together? What is easier to maintain? What's your take on this one, Terry?
I've asked other people this and as well, because I've been curious what others are doing. My take is to follow the same method that we've been taught with Process Builder and put it together in one. I hope that at some point we'll be able to, with a record trigger flow, call other flows, and when we're able to do that, I like the idea of having a single flow that acts as my traffic cop that sends people off to other flows when they get a little bit more complex. But I'm in the one flow for the almost sort of one before record trigger flow and one after record trigger flow per object. The exception might be if I've got let's say I'm doing record trigger flows for an account, and I've got an account record type that is specifically like for vendors and one that's for customers, and those workflow rules would never ever be the same for those because they're very distinct use cases for an account. Then I would probably separate those into multiple record trigger flows. And you use the entry criteria, I think, of the flow. I think that's what they call it, to segment out those
entry criteria, start conditions. Yeah, they actually both mean the same thing.
I combine them.
Yeah, I'm in that area. I'm a little bit more liberal. I mean, I would use multiple as long as it works and tests well. But I don't really think we have a consensus there. I mean, general recommendation is to use from multiple resources at this point, to use one per type, one before save and one after save. The one limitation on before save is though that if you really want to organize everything in subflows, we don't have subflows in before save yet.
Yeah, and Jen just corrected me on the subflows are available in the after save. So thank you, Jen, for that.
Yep, subflows are available in the after save.
Very good. Nice.
And
I love having smarter people than me. It's just awesome.
And Manisha says, is there any challenge we might face by converting workflow process builders to flow? With the topic name, I was expecting we are going to discuss something like that. Just curious. What would be the biggest challenge?
I would say just learning, not being afraid of flow, getting comfortable, getting in there and actually doing it, I think is one of the biggest hurdles. I will tell you, when I teach flow using the I'm going to forget the name of it now, where they give us the diagram. It's not the freeform, it's the other one, and I forgot its name now. But if you go into the freeform one, you get this huge white canvas, and I always hear people say, man, that's intimidating. I don't know what to do.
Freeform and auto layout, I think, right?
Auto layout. If you do the auto layout, and I don't know why it's still beta. It's been beta for 20 years, I think. But the auto layout is a lot easier in my opinion, to learn. You've got nice little, it creates your lines and your diagram for you. It's just a lot easier, I think, to follow and understand. So that would be one thing I would suggest if you're learning that, is use the auto
Yeah.
layout.
I mean, I've done the same functionality that we have in workflow rules on the flow side and the process builders as well. The simple stuff, the fast field update. Fast field update is 1,000 times better because we have the before save, right? There's no reason to wait. It's very simple too. If somebody tells me it's much more difficult on the flow side, I don't really agree with that. I can do that super fast. The other day, I've done a demo on the Power Hour for Salesforce, and it took me 2 minutes 30 seconds to build one. I timed it. So that's not a big deal. And then the task creation is simple, although the interface requires for you to know which fields are required and things like that. You may need to remember the field names. You don't really get the form kind of UI that you have on workflow rules. The email alerts you can call from within Flow, so that's easy. If you're using email alerts, you can just call them directly on the Flow side. The email sending I wouldn't say is very optimal on the flow side yet. I expect some maybe consolidation and an easier functionality on the flow side for that one in the coming releases, I'm hoping. So, yeah, those are the topics that we wanted to talk about. But I think we have an announcement to make too, right, Terry? Is this the last session that we're going to do together, or what is it?
No,
Are we
no.
retiring? Are we retiring us too?
Some people might like to retire us. No, I think Andy and I have talked about doing this more frequently and kind of following the model of that we've seen with various office hours. And I don't know what we're going to call it yet, Andy, but we're going to host is it monthly, maybe a monthly office hours, where if you've got specific flow questions, you're looking for some help with flow, to simply connect in and let us help you. We'll kind of crowdsource it and try to help people learn flow, answer the questions that they might have, and
Yeah.
help you get over the whatever hurdles you might be facing with flow.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about some resources that are available that are very useful. We have Trailhead Live, we have the blogs, and all kinds of stuff coming from Salesforce, more to come. And we also cooperate and work together, obviously. And then we have our own YouTube channels where we do content. We have the user group that you have, Terry, and I do the Salesforce Saturday in Jacksonville. And whenever I do a lot of community events like you do, and then we usually put them out, invite people. Now they are all virtual, so you can join from anywhere you want. I just done one for India this weekend. It was fantastic. And we put out the recordings obviously there, and then we also generate like structured content, you and I, and then we put out things like, how do you do this under 10 minutes, and how do you use variables. You have created some basics. Can you talk about that? Like you are doing some fundamentals content.
Yeah, so I'm working on a series right now called Fundamentally Flow. I've got one post out there on my blog site and YouTube channel on it, just simply talking about what's a variable. For those of you who don't come at this with a programming background, there's a lot of concepts with flows that may be new to you. And so this series that I'm working on is specifically around that. So it's taking concepts that you understand today and making it relevant to how you might apply it to building flows. So I've got out there now, what's a variable. I'm working on working with data is the next one. That one should be out here in the next couple of weeks. We'll go through the concept of loops. And I've got a simple way of helping you understand loops that I think will be easy for folks to understand. So just a variety of very simple concepts. I mentioned before the From Process Builder to Lightning Record Trigger Flows. That series is out there that covers all of the basic elements that you will leverage inside a flow. That's a good one. I've done that as in some of the community events. I've taught that one as well. That one's kind of scary for me to teach because I do it live, kind of like
Yeah.
you, Andy. I kind of live on the edge with that, and I always hope at the end when I hit the activate button, everything works like it's supposed to. But um, that's always kind of fun to do. But it gives you kind of a sense of how easy it can be to learn flow. I think people get in there and they become a little intimidated before they actually try it. So I like Jen's comment of roll up your sleeves and just try it. And
Yeah.
that really I think is a great way to do this.
Yeah, and on my side, we've discussed this a little bit. I have the Udemy Flow course that you can get. That's
Mhm.
obviously paid content, but I continue creating and publishing free content on the Salesforce Break YouTube channel. And if you go over there, you are going to also find a couple of other links and resources. One, I created a Salesforce Break Slack workspace. We have about 250 people, and then we actually answer just flow questions. You can either go to Ohana Slack that we have for the community in general. We have actually a process and flow channel there, or especially for new beginners, I would say, because I've been observing that the questions on the Ohana Slack have been getting harder and harder, more involved. So we have only one rule on Salesforce Break Slack: there are no stupid questions. So come in there, ask your questions, we'll try and answer. And because that brings me to my point, I wanted to mention one of the great ways of learning flow is try and solve other people's use cases, because you have always newcomers asking questions saying, where do I find use cases? You can actually go to all these content creators. They are sharing use cases. You can try to build and rebuild those in different ways, and you can also try and answer questions on Slack, on Salesforce Break Slack, on uh, the success platforms and the trailblazer groups. There is Stack Exchange. There are so many platforms. Just see where people get stuck, and how they cannot solve their own issues, and how you can solve it for them, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's the idea behind the office hours that we're going to do, Andy, is just try to,
Yes.
it's not that you and I are the experts that have to answer every question. If there's other experts in the community who want to take part in that, or if you're taking part and you've crossed a hurdle that somebody else is facing, absolutely open it up to where you're able to share and we help each other.
Yes, and yeah, that actually brings us to a natural kind of closing. Yeah, now we are adding this our joint office hours. We are adding our joint office hours to all this content, and there is absolutely no reason for you to wait. Get started, start practicing and building on your flow canvas. And if you get stuck, you just reach us on any of these channels, and we are going to answer your questions. We are going to also publish an office hour that you can go to and ask your questions as well. So, any final closing words as we finish the hour?
No, I was just on that office hours. Andy and I are still kind of working out the details. So do follow us, and so that you're able to see those announcements when we get that made. And when we do make the announcements, feel free to share that with those in the community that so that we can make it an effective option for people out there trying to learn flow. But Andy, I just want to say thanks for inviting me again to participate with you. It's always fun to do
Thanks
this
for
with you.
coming.
And I'm super excited for what Flow is going to have for us in the future. I know there's just it seems like every time I go in there, I learn something new that I hadn't seen before. So
Yeah.
it's an exciting time, I think, for the platform as we begin to transition away from some of the original workflow options into this new method. And it's a lot of fun to get in and just see what you can do that honestly we used to have to rely on developers to build for us. So it's an exciting time for sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming to our session. I thank Terry for doing this with me. And as Terry said, so please stay tuned. We are going to announce the details of these office hours sessions. And please do tell us if you're interested, what time zone, what times you want these sessions in, where you are currently. and so that we can shape this, right? We can shape this to get the most participation and the most benefit from it. I always say, when I communicate with people, I'm not going to rest until you feel comfortable and confident on the Flow Builder canvas. I think Terry feels exactly the same way. So we are going to join forces, and we're going to make that happen for you.
Should be fun.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody. Comment on LinkedIn or YouTube on the questions that we've had for you on the office hours and everything else. All right. Bye-bye.